Does the UK need to come out of the EU to stop the flow of immigrants living in this country?
Chukwuemeka.
Look, I am the son of an immigrant. I believe immigration has brought tremendous benefits to our country. In the wake of the war, immigrants helped rebuild our country. A lot of our public services wouldn't be able to operate were it not for immigrants working in them. And if you look at the cultural diversity and richness of our nation, I think immigration has brought a lot. I think in terms of people's concerns, all they ask is that we have properly controlled borders, that we don't have people coming in and undercutting British workers, and that they are not exploited themselves. But I certainly don't think that pulling out of the EU would be a good thing for our economy. The EU is our nearest and biggest market, and it's actually the key that unlocks the door to many of these emerging markets.
And that overrides any concern your party might have, remembering they apologised for what they did on immigration, on the flow of immigrants into this country.
Well, I don't think that we got everything right on immigration, but look, we've gone through a difficult period as a country, and economically it's been very difficult for us indeed coming out of the 2008-9 crash. And we've got some big challenges ahead. Automation, the use of computers, is changing the nature of jobs, and we're facing challenges from India, China, and the other emerging markets. I don't think that pulling out of the EU is necessarily going to solve that problem. And I also don't think doing one of those classic things that people sometimes do when you're going through adversity, blaming the other for the problems that we face, is a way that we're actually going to ensure that we win in the future.
You've seen the latest net migration figures, which are pretty much the size of the city of Southampton last year. Are those numbers for you acceptable, right?
Well, I think we would like to see immigration come down. But let's not forget, by the way, we have around 2 million Brits living in the EU. I think we have slightly more than that from the EU living here. But do I think coming out of the EU is going to solve the issues that we have competing in the world against the emerging market economies? No, I don't. I think to do that, we're going to have to innovate, make sure that we invest in our science base, and we've got to ensure that our people have the skills that they need to succeed in the world. I don't think that pulling out of the EU is going to solve those big problems that we have as a country.
Nigel Farage.
It's a very good question, and the answer is yes. I mean, either you want to have an immigration policy or you don't. And when I hear Chucky use the word control, we need to control our borders. And if I hear it from anybody else on the panel, let's be frank, we have signed up through a series of treaties in Brussels to a total, unrestricted, open door. 485 million people have the right to come and live and settle in this country. And in the first 3 decades of our EEC/EU membership, no one noticed, because actually we all had roughly similar living standards, similar education systems, similar healthcare. Then we let in, it was Labour that did it, a series of countries, 8 countries, that had not long been out of communism, who in many cases have not actually readjusted to being the kinds of countries in terms of culture that we were. We've extended that to Romania and Bulgaria. You know, our minimum wage is 9 times that of Romania. And now we have in the Eurozone a catastrophe in the Mediterranean with youth unemployment at 60% in some of those countries. And I think the numbers we've seen from the EU already are as nothing to what we're going to see over the course of the next 3 to 4 years. And my argument, and I wouldn't dispute, that controlled immigration can be a big net benefit to Britain economically and culturally and everything else. But we have no control. And we've no idea next year whether 200,000 are coming, 500,000 are coming, 800,000 are coming. There is nothing we can do. And I would advocate that one of the big benefits of not being a member of the European Union is we get back control of our borders so that we can decide who comes to Britain. We shouldn't be discriminating against people from India and New Zealand, which we currently do because we have an open door to Romania and Bulgaria. Let's have our own immigration policy, and let's control not just the quantity of who comes to Britain, but the quality of who comes to Britain.
Let's not forget what Nigel said. Let's not forget. Nigel, we've heard this from Nigel before. So apparently there's going to be a catastrophe in the Eurozone in the coming months, and according to his posters, 26 million people are going to want to come here. And remember what we heard. Remember what we heard from you on Bulgaria and Romania. You said that we would have this huge wave of people coming over here. That hasn't happened.
All right, thank you.
Have you seen the migration figures?
Nigel, you made your point.
I mean,
Nigel, there are 5 people on this panel. I'm sorry, I don't.
The figures are the figures, David.
Shirley Williams.
Well, I'm the 3rd person on this panel. Look, let's be quite honest. This country is tremendously dependent on some of the immigrants who come here. Go into any NHS hospital. Go and have an operation. Look to see who the health assistants are. Look to see who the doctors are. Many of them will not be from this country. Some will be from other EU countries. Some will be from other Commonwealth countries. And frankly, the NHS, of which I'm extremely proud, would break down without them. They have been indispensable to it. Go into your hotels and your pubs and your cafes. Now, I'm not in favour of the very low wages we pay people in catering. I think it should be at the very least the minimum wage. But frankly, they are doing jobs that we cannot get English people to do because the pay is too poor.
Are you not worried at all by the numbers of people who come, over 200,000?
No, it's not a case about the numbers. It's whether, in fact, the people who come here are fitting into jobs that we need done. Our unemployment has not soared up in the way that, frankly, Nigel and others said it would. We have relatively low unemployment for the countries of our area, much lower than that of the United States. So it isn't, there are a lot of spectres around here, and they're not worth looking at really carefully, because a lot of them are just exactly that, they're spectres. Let me say one other thing. What many people don't realise is that if we didn't have, for example, a steady flow of substantial numbers of overseas students, including into Southampton University, which I'm on doc, we would have to close one course after the other. There aren't enough people in the technical, mathematical and economic courses to keep them open for Brits unless we have overseas students. And overseas students now pay a very substantial part of all the costs of our universities, much more, a much higher cost than would be met simply by tuition fees. We would see tuition fees go up even further if we didn't invite overseas students. Finally, I've got one last point.
All right. I'll come back to you. Let me just bring this man in here. Yes, you, sir.
I think the policies are wrong to start with. Why should we be able to just turn up in this country and expect everything that they can get over here? So why not have jobs that are open to them? Yeah, so they can come in here, a bit like Australia or America, where you have the green card or whatever to go over. So you apply for what you get when you come here. Don't have an issue with the people coming over here with the hospitals and everything. We have a minimum wage as well. So
it's not one-sided. I had an extremely ill, close relative. He was an NHS patient. He was a Brit. He'd worked in the British Army. He became extremely ill only last year with a serious heart condition. He was looked after absolutely brilliantly in France and later in Italy, and he never paid a penny because there is a common NHS card which is shared by the whole of the European Union, which means every one of us who travels to Europe will get what we never get if we travel to the United States or China. We get full health safety. Right. So we really must sort out something as well.
That's right, Nigel. Let me come back to the question. Grant Shapps, then I'll come to you two. Yes.
Does the UK need to pull out of Europe to control immigration was the question. And the answer is we want you to be able to have a say in this. I believe that immigration has benefited this country. I believe that it's important that people are allowed to travel around a free market, which includes people being able to move around. I'm surprised to hear what Nigel had to say. Who'd be his secretary without his German wife, for example, if there was no free movement? So the question really is, what kind of free movement and how far should it go? When new countries join the EU, as we just saw with Romania and Bulgaria, we've been arguing when countries come in and they have a very different level standard of living, that there should be a potential for a longer transition period. That's exactly the sort of thing that we want to renegotiate with the EU on, and we want to put that to a referendum. So not us, not the politicians, not Labour and the LimpDems, who I would argue don't want to do anything but take us further into Europe, or Nigel, who can't deliver, but Conservatives, who are the people who can deliver on Europe, and will do that by giving you an in-out referendum.
Is that giving people a say, Nigel, in your
Grant,
terms?
why don't you tell them the truth?
Why
don't you tell them the truth?
What he said was, we want you to have your say.
Yeah, but the question was, do we have to put under the EU to control immigration? And Grant says, I haven't got an opinion, it's up to you in a referendum. Well, we've heard all that before. David Cameron was promising one at the last European elections and didn't deliver. Come on, let's be honest. You, along with Labour, the Lib Dems, the Greens, the political establishment in Britain, have all voted at every given opportunity.
You've been an MEP for 15 years.
You're the establishment. Well, I tell you what, they haven't tamed me yet, all right?
Nigel, you've
not the establishment.
They haven't tamed me yet. And Grant, no party has been keener on the free movement of peoples within the European Union than the Conservatives, so much so that your leader even wants Turkey to join the European Union with free movement to be extended.
All right,
wait, 80 million people.
Nigel, Caroline Lucas, and then a number of people with their hands up, and I'll come to you. Caroline Lucas.
Well, I'm going to say something that's quite unusual, because I agree with Nigel on one point only, which is that I do think people should have a say about the EU, and I don't think kicking it off into the long grass, as the Conservatives are doing, is the right thing to do. I think...
What would your say be?
Did you vote?
Referendum?
Did you vote for it?
Yes, I did, actually.
Thank you.
I did vote for it. There's a bit of consistency there. And so
An in-out referendum.
I do think we should have an in-out referendum. And if we were to have such a referendum, the Green Party would be voting to stay in. Because when I was thinking that this subject might just possibly come up tonight, I was making a little note on the train of the things that the EU have done for us. So when people say to you, what has the EU ever done for you? I've got a few things here. No, it's not very much, really. Providing 57% of our trade, clean beaches and rivers, cleaner air, lead-free petrol, restrictions on landfill dumping, a recycling culture, cheaper mobile charges, improved consumer protection and food labelling, ban on growth hormones and other harmful food additives, better product safety, freedom to travel, live and work across Europe.
How much more is there here?
I've hardly started, but the point is pulling out of the EU. Pulling out of the EU would be a disaster, and it is a false choice. But, can I say one thing? The thing that makes me most cross of all, though, is when Nigel Farage tries to pretend that he's a man of the people, that he's anti-establishment. If you look at the policies of UKIP, they are anything but. UKIP is the party that is claiming lots of money from rich bankers who are bankrolling...
Is that relevant to this question, Caroline?
It is as part of the...
This is an immigration question, so...
No, I was talking to you about...
I'm fascinated by how this all fits in.
I'll tell you how it fits in, Nigel, if you just be quiet for a second. It fits in because you just said you were anti-establishment. You are at the centre of the establishment.
I didn't say I was anti-establishment.
Yes, well, you said you were against the establishment.
I said you were part of the establishment.
You said you were counter to the establishment.
Well, he actually said he hadn't been tamed. I've not been tamed.
But, you know, Nigel will say that, you know, he will say what no one else dares to say. But I tell you what I dare to say is, and that is that we have a chronic housing shortage, we have an NHS under strain, we have a culture of low pay, but the fault of that lies with the government, not with migrants.
All right. I'm going to bring in... There are many people with their hands up. I come to the woman in the second row from the back there. Yes.
First of all, I'd like to add to Shirley Williams's list that the care industry also is heavily dependent on immigrants. I've also been to Italy and been ill. I didn't have to show my passport and had x-rays and excellent care without paying a penny. There was bound to be a huge period of adjustment when the new countries joined Europe with regard to immigration, for example. But it will settle down, I believe. And I think that, you know, making immigration the reason for leaving Europe seems to me to be a very, very short-sighted reason.
I'm absolutely with you, and it's... I agree with you, but I'd add one other thing which we tend to forget. The countries that have come into the EU in the last few years, like Bulgaria, Romania, earlier on Poland, are countries that have become democracies. And we should be very proud of that fact, that the concept of democracy and the rule of law has spread throughout the whole of Europe, including Eastern Europe and Central Europe, in a way that our grandparents would never believe possible.
But did it need to involve free movement of
Yes,
people?
it did. Absolutely, essentially. Why? Because the essence of the whole idea was the equality of all citizens in the EU, and above all, what Ernest Bevin said years ago, I want to live in a continent where you don't have to show a passport, go from one place to the other. It's the ideal of the liberty of individuals to move where they want to live.
Former Labour Foreign Secretary. And you, sir, in the second row from the back, in the brown shirt. Yes.
Will anybody admit immigration from Europe has got out of hand?
Yes, I will.
He will.
Yes, I will.
All right. Well, hold on. You know Nigel Farage will. Who do you want to admit it?
Any of them.
Any of them.
Not from Nigel. Nobody's even taking it on the, taking it on.
Chance.
First of all,
too many.
First of all,
especially in Southampton.
First of all, there's a whole other side to what movement around Europe actually means. Yeah. It means that millions of Brits have gone and settled in places like Spain and France and elsewhere to work or retire. So we have to be looking at this in the round. The idea that you just ban it one way, of course, they ban it the other way. So there are advantages to Brits. But I do agree that you have to control these things. That's why this government has introduced measures to make sure that, for example, you cannot now go to the front of the housing queue if you haven't lived in an area and had an attachment. You can't use the health service as if it's the international health service. That was wrong, and we put an end to that, and that's quite right as well. And it's interesting to see that because we've taken a series of different steps, that the predicted mass movement of people from Romania and Bulgaria does not appear to have taken place.
I think that's because of the measures you took.
Yes, I think all of these
not
things...
because they just didn't particularly want to come.
No, well, I think all of these things. One of the things that we did very early on was extended from the minimum amount of time that Labour had put in for transitions. We added another 2 years up to the legal maximum for transition between the time that Romanian and Bulgarians came into the EU and were able to come here. Now that allowed more time to move around.
Is the coalition getting it right where Labour got it wrong?
Well, the things that they have been doing recently are things that we called for, like strengthening the habitual residence test. But may I just say something about this, David? I think it's really important that we have a calm and rational debate about immigration. I think sometimes the tone of the debate in our country has become quite ugly. So when people like Nigel say things like, when I'm on a bus or a train I feel uncomfortable, but was it awkward if I hear people speaking another language other than English? I think that's kind of ugly. So let's have a calm and rational debate. I do actually.
Do you think,
I do.
So,
I do.
So do you not think that people coming to this country in reasonable controlled numbers, learning English and integrating and becoming part of us is not important? I think it's very, very important indeed. Very important. Very important.
You have completely misinterpreted what I've said there. I haven't argued against integration. What I've argued against is letting this debate descend into something that is quite nasty and quite ugly. There are a lot of buses and trains that if you got on in my constituency in London in Streatham, where you would hear other people talking different languages other than English, and you say that makes you feel awkward. What you say makes me feel awkward, Nigel.
Well, I'm sorry. We need... Surely, the essence of this question is about should we pull out of the EU so that we can control immigration? And my argument is that unless we can control the numbers that come into Britain, we will not get integration, we will get increasing separation within our communities, and that, I think, is something nobody wants.
All right. Hold on a second. You, sir.
I just want to say, we're talking about the EU and we're saying about coming in or out of the EU for immigration. There's hundreds more reasons to be doing it and against it, so for and against. But I'm sort of quite proud to say that I'm only quite a young chap, I'm only just getting into politics and quite enjoying it as well. And I feel that the only way I can go is that these decisions to go in the EU were made before I had a choice and a stance to say. And I think the referendum gives people that are getting interested in politics and that are younger to redo that. And I don't think it's a bad thing to go back and sometimes relook at the balance and say, all our heads are better, 50 heads are better than one. Same as a country's way forward is better than one party choosing. Labour have good points. UKIP might have good points. But Conservative Party are the only people putting forward to give everyone a chance to choose a way forward for the best for everyone.
Absolutely. Well done to Caroline for voting for the bill when it was in front of Parliament that would have given the same. And shame on Labour and the Lib Dems for not allowing this Parliament to give people the in-out referendum on Europe.
Shirley?
Well, I don't expect Grant to remember my whole history, well, the hell should he? But I was actually the member of the cabinet, the Labour cabinet, who resigned on the grounds that we weren't going to have a referendum, so I'm not the right one for him to pick on. Let me be very precise, though.
You may be the only member of the panel who got the opportunity to vote as well.
Let me, however, I want to address the gentleman concerned. We're getting distracted, I think, in the whole EU discussion by what we can only describe as issues like, for example, tossing to and fro party views on immigration and things of that kind. I read yesterday in the newspaper, the American newspapers, the devastating effects of climate change. The only people who can do anything serious about climate change are not individual countries like the UK or Germany or France. It's the whole lot together who have some chance of doing something about that, as they had to have some chance of doing something about organised crime. And I'm not in the business here of making sort of party points, except one, which I must make. I must make it to, in fact, Nigel, who I actually respect. I think he's a highly intelligent man. He's also great fun to have a drink with. But let me put.
That's after the programme.
Let me put one serious question to him. His people in the European Parliament voted against a directive from the EU to limit and stop human trafficking. Human trafficking of children and people who are dragged into this country as semi-slaves. Now, I think Nigel's got to take a grip on his party because he's got some very funny characters in it.
Hang on, Shirley. Hang on, Shirley.
I'm sorry, I'm not being rude. I just want to say that because I gave you a precise example which really bothers me.
You have pushed, as a Liberal Democrat party, very strongly in Brussels and Strasbourg, the idea of justice and home affairs becoming issues that move from the jurisdiction of the British Parliament to the European institutions. And you can talk about people trafficking and all the rest of it, but it's your party that sponsored the European arrest warrant that led to a guy from North London with no prima facie evidence being presented to a British court, being taken, dumped for a year in a hellhole in Greece without facing charge. Since Magna Carta in this country, we've had habeas corpus, the presumption of innocence before guilt, and I'm afraid that they're the things that you, and you call yourself a Liberal party, and you've thrown them away.
And we've had
so that's why I don't support any of it.
The great train robber who was rescued for years in Spain.
Right, let's leave that for a moment. Caroline Lucas, then I'm going to bring in 2 or 3 other members of the audience.
Well, I only want to go back to the young man in the front row there who was saying that he was enjoying getting involved in politics and wanted the opportunity to vote on membership of the EU, and I was simply going to say that the kinds of issues that we've been talking about now are the ones that need to be properly thrashed out with people that haven't had the opportunity to have their say over it at the moment. And I think that the points that Shirley raises about the role that the EU can play, for example, in tackling climate change or in promoting human rights, is absolutely vital. And we need to have that debate, and this will enable us to engage people with the EU, because right now I feel that a lot of people, you went out on the streets of Southampton and said, what's the EU for? People don't know anymore. It's lost its way. It's lost its vision. We need to re-inspire a vision of what the EU could be for. It needs a lot of reform. It needs to be far more democratic and accountable. It needs to be far more transparent. Lots of very easy ways of managing it. It won't if you leave. It won't happen if you leave, that's for sure.
It's never going to reform,
It won't happen if you leave.
How could you reform something that is based on treaties?
Nigel, our audience has come here not just to listen to you, but also to debate with you and the other members of the panel. So let's have a go.
From a practical perspective, if net immigration is the size of the city of Southampton, where are they all going to live? Rents are spiralling out of control as it is. Where are my children going to find a house to live?
Well, we have to build.
Chukwumune, do you want to answer?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the reason that we have housing problems right now is because we have the lowest rate of new builds since the 1920s. And again, to go to the point that was made earlier, we can blame all our problems on the EU if we want, but actually we've got to sort them out here. That is a responsibility of government. Can I just say something else actually, David? Because we're talking about whether we're in or out. Of course, if we come out of the EU, we are still likely to have to comply with all their rules and regulations to sell our goods in there. At least if you're on the field playing the match, batting for Britain, you can actually get a good deal. Well, what you would do, you just walk off the field. You would walk off the field and not defend any interest at all.
The argument.
All right. Okay.
The argument, David, the argument that we can battle for Britain has been given lied to under freedom of information requests in 55 occasions since 1996, so mostly under a Labour government, partly under a coalition. On 55 occasions at the Council of Ministers, the British government have said, we are going to fight hard against this directive, and we have lost on all 55 occasions.
I think
Let's stop banging our heads against the brick wall and recognise we're not winning, we're not succeeding, and we ought to be governing our own country and making our own laws. Surely that makes more sense.
Surely what we're...
Were you saying absolutely?
Surely what we're witnessing...
I tell you what, it's absolutely...
Sorry, were you saying absolutely or absolutely?
Am I right? No, I was saying absolute nonsense.
Oh, OK, fine.
Okay,
Grant Shapps.
All right, no. All right. If you're looking, for example, on...
No, Grant Shapps.
Right, surely what we're witnessing here are 2 extremes. One party, the Labour Party, that will not give you an in-out referendum on Europe. The other party, UKIP, who say they want one, but admit at the same time they cannot deliver. That's why the Conservative approach, in-out referendum, is the only feasible solution to this. People of our generation, with the exception of Shirley, have never been given a say. let's renegotiate it and put it to the British
and
people.
vote to stay in is what you want.
And vote how you like, Nigel.
Cameron wants to say.
Can I ask you one very simple question? Why is it always renegotiate and then have a referendum? Why not just have a referendum?
Because if you had...
Pop off the electorate. That's what it's all about.
No, because if you had a referendum without actually having agreed what the subject was, in other words...
Well, the subject is, should you be in or out of Europe?
But there's a better option, isn't there? The better option is, rather than just say these two extreme positions, it's all fine, as Chuck will tell you, or it's all disastrous, as Nigel will tell you, actually you can do things like renegotiate the position when new countries join Europe.
How do you avoid it being the trick that Harold Wilson paid? When he renegotiated just a little bit and then had everybody say, go for it.
For this simple reason. Number one,
I remember because I voted in that. You voted in that too.
For this simple reason. People like the two of you will remind us that that was the trick and we won't fall for it again. And secondly, because it will be up to everybody else to make the decision, has enough of renegotiation taken place? Have we returned powers to this country? Have we come to a position which people are comfortable with and then give people an in-out referendum? And only the Conservatives will deliver.
All right, hold on. We'll hear about fantasy in a minute. All right.
It is fantasy.
Yes, now let's just listen to our audience again.
Grant, I think yourself and Caroline and Chuka and your colleagues in the political elite, what you miss about UKIP is that the motivation for what you do politically is almost as important as what you do. So the fact you've now offered a referendum is great, but you'll never claim the political credit for it because you were forced into a position where you had to. Cameron reneged on his cast iron promise. Let me finish, Grant. Let me finish. Then you can come back. Let me finish. And now you're saying, well, we'll put it to you. And people are saying, we don't, as an electorate, it's a funny kind of relationship we have, but we want to be led as much as we want you to listen. Okay. And what UKIP have done is they've put their finger on a problem that concerns a lot of people and they've led.
Okay.
What you've all done in the mainstream media and the metropolitan elite is you've responded to things happening because you don't understand what life is like for people out there in Britain. You don't understand it. So how can...
Caroline Lucas wants to respond to you, and then, of course, Grant Shapps.
Well, I think that gentleman has put his finger absolutely on something incredibly important because, when people look at people who are going to vote UKIP, and sometimes they're very rude and say, oh, they're racists or they're bigots or whatever, I don't think that's the case. I think they're very angry. I think probably many of you are very, very angry. And that's because it feels to you, I'm sure, as it does to many, that the political elite at Westminster simply doesn't understand your lives. When you look in on them at Westminster, it feels as if... they're absolutely out of touch. And the danger of that, though, is that UKIP's policies, which are on so many areas, are so dubious. It's almost as if it doesn't matter about the policies because your anger is so great. And I understand that, but I just think it's also incredibly dangerous because when you look at UKIP's policies, it's about privatising. Well, it's about privatising
we want our democracy back. What is wrong with that?
Well, I'm talking about your other policies. Privatising the NHS. Let me just finish, Nigel.
We've never said that, Caroline.
I've got your manifesto.
Wait. We're not going into UKIP's manifesto at this stage. No, hold on. We're dealing with the question that he asked.
Again,
yes.
you're missing the point. We don't know what will happen in the future. But if we've got elected representatives who we trust, we know that they will deal with the situation in a way that we would want them to. So we don't have this kind of direct democracy.
All right, Grant Shapps, it was addressed to you.
You don't have the trust at the moment.
Grant Shapps.
Well, first of all, the biggest lie that needs to be quashed is that there was somehow a referendum promised in a previous manifesto. That is not the case. Okay, well, show me the page, Nigel. Well, hold on a minute. Yeah. We're talking about the manifesto upon which this Conservative-led government got elected, and there was no referendum in there.
2009 European elections, you said vote for us and we will guarantee you a referendum if we get into
Nigel, before you... Nigel.
I'm sorry.
Nigel...
I mean, come on.
Nigel, if you're
be straight about
it.
Nigel,
rather than barracking, if you actually let somebody else get a word in, the fact of the matter is that actually in the last general election, that was not in our manifesto. The only reason it was in the previous one was because it was before the Lisbon Treaty had been passed, something which I voted against along with every other Conservative in Parliament. And the reason, to answer your question, why we can be and should be trusted when we say that we want a referendum in 2017 is during this Parliament we've cut the EU budget, something that Nigel and his colleagues, the MEPs in Europe, voted against. Yes, it saves this country £8 billion over the next 10 years. We vetoed the EU treaty. We've got us out of a bailout fund that Labour signed us up to in the dying days of their government. So when we say we will give you an in-out referendum, we mean it. We will give it to you.
All right.
Labour and LimpDems won't,
We'll carry on with this a bit longer, but I just ought to say at this point, of course, as you know, if you're a regular watcher of Question Time, you can join in the debate from home by text or Twitter. And I should just remind you, the hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981, push the red button, and see what others are saying. Yes, you, sir.
Surely, whatever issues we have with Europe, whether we want to be in or out of Europe, I think it would be a mistake to see the answer to vote in MEPs who then aren't going to turn up and try and change what's going on in Europe.
What you think? You're saying UKIP MEPs don't turn up in...
It's not actually, I think it's
40% of them have resigned,
defected. Hang on a second, hang on. This is directed at me.
What happens is your posters display, and I saw one the other day, a man in the back of the car saying that your taxpayers' money funds his millionaire lifestyle. Actually, our taxpayers' money funds yourselves as well, going over there not turning up to do the job for which you're paid to do.
Either we go, you really can't have this argument both ways. Either we do turn up and enjoy the luxury lifestyle, or we don't turn up. You can't have it both ways. What we want to do, we are the turkeys that would vote for Christmas. We want to get rid of British MEPs. We want to get rid of British commissioners. We don't need any of this to trade and cooperate with our next-door neighbours in Europe.
That's why 40% of your MEPs elected last time round have resigned, defected, or gone to jail.
No, not one of them's gone to jail. And if you start talking about expenses scandals after Newark, you're a little bit of trouble there, I suspect. So none of them in this Parliament.
I would just like to pick up
one of them.
It was the last Parliament.
I would just, I just want to pick up on the point that was made about trust in politics. I actually think we have fundamental issues of trust, not just vis-à-vis politics, but the police, the media, many parts of society. So I think that's right. And I think there is also a sense that there is a disconnect between the governed, people who, you know, policymakers and the people we're supposed to work for. I think there's also anger. But I don't think the solution to that is setting up different parts of our community against each other, setting up the other as the target that we blame for all our problems. I actually think actually we need to return to our values of social solidarity.
Trigger, look at me though.
Do you think I would do that? UKIP isn't the answer. No,
Trigger, I'm half Indian, for Christ's sake.
But you were also, sir, you were also talking about the kinds of policies that UKIP have been promoting. Now, I don't think people want to pay for key NHS services, like going to see your GP, as Nigel would have you do that. I don't think people want to give the top 1% a massive tax cut. That's your manifesto. I mean, you set yourselves up as somehow the voice of working people. You would do so many things which would do unbelievable damage to my community.
Help us with a manifesto. That's very kind.
I thought you didn't have any policies. We don't know what your policies are. We don't know what your policies are.
Hang on, but you don't have a manifesto anymore, do you? Isn't that right?
None of the parties.
You specifically don't. You abandoned.
Nor do you. None of us have an election manifesto for next year. Let's be clear about that.
Now, I want to go back to this gentleman.
Yes.
He did raise a very serious point, the point about trust. But I have to ask him this, whether the crisis of trust is a very much wider one than he was implying. Let's look at the attitude we've had towards the banks. The banks have been so troubling that people like the Archbishop of Canterbury have said that they've lost their moral compass. If you look at what Barclays has done in the last week or so, it's had to lay off a huge number of people, including most of its investment bank, because of the record of the past. Now, you've got to therefore ask a much deeper question. And that much deeper question is, how do we restore trust? Not just in politicians, and that's important, but in politics as a whole. And I think the answer to that is two things. One is that there must be a much greater acceptance of our joint responsibility for the way that we behave and for the moral standards that we try to uphold. And secondly, I think it also means that we've got to actually have a far more active democracy where we involve people at local community level in their own decisions. I think centralisation in this country has gone too far. And I think in particular London dominates everything. But having said that, I think, with great respect to you, you've got to look deeper than just flicking at politicians, because that's the easy, cheap one. But the whole thing is much deeper than that.
I absolutely agree with you.
All right. I'm going to take a couple more points and then we'll move on, because yes. The man at the very back there, in the back row. Yes, with the...
Right. Nigel, just let me finish, please.
You haven't started yet.
I know, that's the point. I'm old enough to have read about McCarthyism, and I'm old enough to have read the River of Blood speech.
Enoch Powell's speech.
Enoch Powell's speech.
Enoch Powell's speech, yes.
And the point is...
And I'm also aware of what happens in elections where a climate of fear is caused amongst the electorate by the charismatic, the bombastic, and to me, the very dangerous. This has driven Europe to war in the past. I have no time for you, sir. None.
You're a very lucky fella, because there are 4 parties on this platform that you can vote for. There are 4 parties on this platform that believe we should not govern our own country, we should surrender our democracy, and we should have the vast majority of our laws made somewhere else over which we have virtually no say. If that's what you want, that's fine. But be aware of one thing. Firstly, we're giving people a choice. We want to trade and cooperate with Europe but not be governed by their institutions. But recognise this. Recognise this. The European dream is failing and crumbling. We, thank goodness, did not join the Eurozone. This whole political project, in a decade's time, is headed for disaster for tens of millions of European peoples. And the irony...
There you are.
The irony,
there you
and the
go.
irony is this.
There
the irony
you go.
is
Now,
this.
I can talk over you just as you can talk over me.
This will lead
you are
to the very extremes.
Just wait a second. Bring your remarks to a conclusion.
The point is, sir, that actually what's happening is the very nationalisms and intolerances and extremisms the EU was supposed to stop, it's creating because of the disastrous failure that is called the Eurozone. It doesn't actually work.
You are driving.
All right, now I'll give you the...